Welcome to the Know. I'm Mica, and I don't know why I'm doing finger guns.
I'm Ben. I will do finger guns.
Hell yeah, finger guns! Sony made some big waves earlier this week by announcing a ton of games and showing off some huge trailers from their biggest exclusive projects, but did some of those trailers take things a bit too far?
It's the internet outrage machine all over again after some online grumbling about the content of two trailers in particular, and Sony is officially responding to the criticism.
And their take is basically that these games are for adults, so deal with it, or we'll take arms with sledgehammers and just sledgehammer your arms.
Now, we've got a totally reasonable discussion on our hands about the line between art and torture porn, with zero hyperbole going on whatsoever.
Totally fine. Just chill out, everybody. First, a little bit of background on how some of this grumbling started and what prompted it. Most of the conversation centered on two particular trailers that Sony debuted on Monday at their Paris Games Week conference. In that conference, they debuted Sucker Punch's new open-world samurai IP, Ghost of Tsushima, more gameplay for God of War, a story trailer for Spider-Man, and the first look at Destiny 2's Curse of Osiris DLC, which looks rad.
Oh, so excited. But the two trailers that raised some eyebrows belong to Detroit Become Human, which depicted scenes of domestic violence to highlight the game's focus on branching narratives. The trailer shows potential outcomes in a scenario involving an abusive father. In one, the child is killed, and another, the father is killed.
On top of that, there was also the Last of Us 2 trailer, which didn't showcase any of Joel and Ellie, and really anything related to the first game at all until the closing seconds, but what it did show was some pretty gruesome torture, and we're kind of rounding back to that sledgehammer to the arm thing. That was in there.
Following that, there was a bit of discussion online from a couple of outlets and on Twitter about what Sony chose to celebrate at the conference. For the record, it doesn't seem like that outcry was very strong or very loud, but it was at least a little bit present, with things like memes contrasting the content of Super Mario Odyssey versus The Last of Us 2.
Oh, good old memes. Regardless of how loud that outcry actually ended up being, Sony decided to nip it in the bud before the close of Paris Games Week. Jim Ryan, president of Sony Interactive Entertainment Europe, spoke about the trailers and the criticism with Telegraph, and for his part, he basically says, of course it's violent. It's for adults.
Okay. Ryan told Telegraph, The Last of Us obviously is a game made by adults to be played by adults. I should never prejudge this, but it will probably be rated 18, and I think it's fair to say. And that's that market for those people who like this sort of game, adults who like that sort of game. And I think we cater for that, and at the other end of the spectrum, there was Concrete Genie, which my 8-year-old decided was the game she would like to play very much.
Ryan went on to say, I think a platform holder provides a platform, and the people who make games, whether they're our own studios or third-party publishers, they bring content to the platform. We provide the platform. We have to ensure the right content is played by the right people, of appropriate ages in particular. I thought The Last of Us Part 2 was a great way to end the show, and I feel very good about it.
He later added that he feels like Naughty Dog absolutely made the right call with that trailer. He also stated that based on what he's seen, he wouldn't be surprised if the game ended up with an 18+ rating, although he wouldn't want to speculate about that.
The statement definitely communicates that Sony has a lot of faith in Naughty Dog, especially if they're thinking the game could end up with an 18+ rating. That's basically the death mark for a lot of games at retail and would severely limit the audience.
Following those comments, we've now got a discussion on our hands about the trailer itself and how much violence is too much violence, and if there is such a thing, with huge threads popping up on places like Reset Era and Reddit.
On one hand, some are saying any type of content is fine in video games, and it's good that they aren't shying away from a mature subject matter. And on the other hand, some are wondering if Naughty Dog could have used a different approach to showing the game itself, merely just, focusing on brutality. So it's not so much the issue of is the content wrong, but was this the wrong way to make a trailer?
It's Naughty Dog, they can do no wrong, right? One particular point of discussion is the idea that if games are considered to be in competition with the films industry, shouldn't it similarly tackle complicated, mature issues? After all, we see this subject matter in movies constantly, especially with things like domestic abuse, but viewers don't really bat an eye.
It's certainly a fair question, but on the other hand, it's worth noting that the consumption of the two mediums is completely different. Games require a much more active role for the player, whereas watching a movie is pretty much more of a passive experience. And as visual fidelity increases and games start to look super realistic, the graphics on that Naughty Dog presentation were proof of that itself. This could naturally affect gamers in way different ways than just watching a movie.
But of course, the flip side of that is, as always, it's simple, don't play the game, which is kind of hard to argue with.
Another point being made in the defense of the trailers is that neither of these two instances are the worst offenders we've seen in gaming by a long shot. The torture scene in GTA 5 comes to mind, as do a handful of scenes from almost any Walking Dead season, and Wolfenstein 2 is being celebrated because of the many different ways you can eviscerate the game's invading Nazi force.
However, none of these games were introduced to us with those kinds of scenes ahead of time, because generally publishers want their games to look a bit more palatable. It's certainly saying something that Sony and Naughty Dog used this instance to introduce The Last of Us 2 to gamers in a more concrete way, because let's get real, the previous teaser was more of a music video.
In the end though, none of the criticisms or defense of the game will be borne out until people can actually play it. We went through a similar cycle several years back with the Tomb Raider reboot after its reveal, it drew a little bit of criticism for seemingly celebrating how brutal it could be to Lara Croft. However, once the game came out, that discussion died down quite a bit.
When it comes to the trailer itself, some of these feelings from critics might be coming from this being a rather, pretty unconventional trailer for a AAA sequel. In a vacuum, it is sort of strange decision to promote this huge sequel in that way. For old players, you don't show any of the familiar faces that people are probably returning to this world to see. And for new players, you haven't really done much in the way of showing them what the game is all about, what it's like, or how it plays.
They pretty much just said, here's torture. Want to play it?
Yeah.
Not
Marketing.
Yeah, great. There's definitely a lot of trust on Naughty Dog's part that players will have enough of a desire to return to the series. After all, as one of your first real looks at the game, you're not even showing much gameplay or context for who these characters are and what they want. Contrast that to the first big trailer for the first Last of Us game, which featured a conversation between Joel and Ellie, plus that famous apartment confrontation, which managed to showcase the brutality of the world and the gameplay all in one go.
But again, that's Naughty Dog's creative decision, and like it or not, they're going to promote their game how they see fit. And props to Sony for sticking by their side on it rather than hanging them out to dry. It definitely shows that they're putting a ton of faith in one of their flagship studios, which is kind of welcome after the way we've seen other studios treated recently when it comes to taking risks, especially with like narrative single-player games.
So what do you guys think about some of its discussions surrounding Sony's trailers? Are people overreacting? Do you think they could have done better? Let us know in the comments.
For future discussions from the Internet Outrage Machine, remember to like this video, and if you're new around here, subscribe to the Know. It's the Internet Outrage Machine all over again. After some online grumbling about the content of two trailers in particular, Sony is officially responding to— wait, let me redo that pacing.
To Tsushima.
Tsushima?
Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima. In that conference, they debuted Sucker Punch.